Hi everyone. Welcome to the start of a mini series on Watchdogs and also Assassin's Creed games. They are in the bellows and on under in the forge, going under the hammer. Myself and my brother, we're going to be, I guess, working out how good they were, what went right, what went wrong. This video is specifically about the two Watchdog games that have come out so far. We'll give you our review on them and some thoughts about which one was better than the other one and comparing them both. And then in a couple of other videos, we'll be talking about the upcoming series and also Assassin's Creed and how that ties in or could tie in further. So without any more ado, let's get straight into our reviews. First of all, what are your first thoughts on both the games?
So I honestly think that both games are definitely really, really fun, to be honest. It's hard for me to sort of talk about them because I have a lot of issues with them, but I also have a lot of positives with them. And I think that's often what happens with Ubisoft, especially in sort of recent years, is that they often have really, really good ideas or premises that they just sort of don't do 100% justice. And I think we'll get into that here. The scores are going to reflect sort of how we feel about the games objectively, but there are portions where we'll be talking about how much we still enjoy these games because, again, I know you like Watch Dogs as well. We've played them both multiple times. So, yeah, we might as well get into I guess we can talk about sort of the protagonist and the plot and the setting, and then sort of go into both reviews one after the other.
We definitely will, and I think something to be said here is that I think they were possibly slightly overrated in hype, and then probably underrated in finished product.
Definitely,
I think it goes both the other ways.
Yeah.
Watch Dogs was very, very hyped, and they had a very good marketing campaign. But I think what Watch Dogs 1 suffered from a lot, and it's no small thing, is the fact that it came out less than a year, just a few months after GTA 5 did. And it was, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's GTA, but with hacking. And it obviously is to a certain extent that, but it's also a hell of a lot more and something very different still. But I think it suffered from that. I think people were piling their time at the time into GTA. And so it really, really was unfortunate with the timing of its launch. And also, and we'll get into this in a second, but a main character that was seen as quite wooden and very shallow almost. And we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, I think that is something to be said. But I think it was a lot better than probably what a lot of people have said. And we'll get into what we think specifically about certain parts. But do we want to start with a bit of a comparison of the main characters and in general, sort of not just the protagonist that you control, but also some of the main sort of NPCs as well?
Yeah, so let's quickly talk about Aiden Pearce from Watch Dogs 1, because I think at the time especially, we didn't really like him that much. He's quite emotionless, really. He's sort of just... It's not even in the way that he's sort of built to be a vessel for you to sort of decide how he's supposed to feel. He just always is kind of this wooden... fairly like bland character that's basically just vigilante, and then you play. That's it. And I think, as you said before, it came out the same sort of year as GTA. And we've got characters in that are very, very like vastly different. You've got Trevor, you've got Michael, you've got Franklin, and a bunch of supporting characters that are very like almost cartoony in how far they go into their sort of personality. And that's a good thing, I think, in GTA. And I think that would have definitely sort of characters like that could have benefited in Watch Dogs really, really well. But I think they definitely missed the mark on Aiden. But when we get into the second protagonist, I'll tell you a bit more about why I think Aiden might actually be better.
Yeah, so I think what's important to remember is GTA is a parody, like a satire game as well. That's why everything's over the top and extra. That's why the beer is called Pisswasser, which is obviously like piss water. That's why everything's over the top and it's satirical. That's why the cops come after you so hard, and they shoot you just for bumping them, for example, right? But they also set it in a bit more of a colourful, vibrant city. Not as vibrant and colourful as the city in Watch Dogs 2, which we'll get to in a second, but Watch Dogs 1 was set in Chicago, which is, a Midwest kind of cold and it was autumn setting as well, by the way. That's so they had all the autumn leaves, and it was, you know, it's colorful, but it's autumn, so it's always going to have that. And then Aidan Pierce as a character was obviously in this mourning phase as well with the death of his niece. I think, if I can say, one of the issues they had here was that they made it like his sister and, you know, niece and nephew, rather than what probably they should have done to make it a bit more understandable and a bit more, is probably make it ex-wife and children, I think. And I think that would have just added a slightly different element to him and made him a little bit more, if that makes sense. Just a small thing, a small change, because there was no husband in the picture with her anyway, so they could have just easily just done it that way. But the setting, I mean, the setting was itself already a bit bleaker, if that makes sense too. And then couple that with you know, a more serious storyline, as opposed to it wasn't a satirical or parodical storyline. It was a serious storyline, which probably didn't help.
Yeah, so I think with Watch Dogs, I think a lot of people compare it to GTA, as we said, but I think actually the closer comparison is their own Assassin's Creed series. And we'll get into this. I think we have another video planned where we really want to talk about sort of comparison between the two. But Ubisoft wanted to do a more serious story. Obviously, it's not a satirical world. It's supposed to be a serious, like, you know, playable game. And I think, yeah, in this case, it sort of hurt the first game quite a bit because, yeah, it sort of comes to be a little bit shallow and a little bit bland in terms of setting and character. And as you said, like, there are a few changes they could have made, like little tweaks here and there that could have made it a little bit more believable for the player. But I think that's pretty much all we have to say on Aidan Pierce and Watch Dogs 1 specifically in terms of protagonist, unless you want to talk about some other side characters.
Let's then talk about Marcus and Watch Dogs 2 as a point of comparison. And, you know, first things first, it's set with Watch Dogs 2 set in like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the Bay Area. So it's already going to be much more vibrant, much more colorful, as San Francisco is. It's a warmer climate, and it was set in summer rather than in autumn as well. Marcus is he's African American rather than being, or is a black guy rather than being a white guy, which starts that way. But he's also younger, I'm pretty sure, and he doesn't have this same level of baggage that Aidan's character comes with. So there's that, and then he has this sort of, it's like a vibrant sort of like liberal, you know what I mean, like the liberal sort of like lefty sort of group of hackers that are more like sort of half social justice warriors at the same time, as, you know what I mean, as being like characters as well. So Aidan was a bit more of a lone wolf, whereas this is already a team, like a whole team thing. I felt like there was more parody aspects in Watch Dogs 2 as well. It felt like there was a bit more comedy influence with some of the characters, like I can never remember his name off the top of my head, but the one that used to wear the mask all the time.
Mask with the faces, yeah.
Was it Wrench? I think Wrench.
I think it was. Yeah.
And some of the like videos that they released, there was a bit more lightheartedness, and so in that sense it was closer to GTA in that style, and it sort of worked to a certain extent. It made it a bit more out and out fun, as opposed to bleak and revenge. It wasn't like a revenge story in the same way, which probably helped it. However, I think Marcus's actual character was more tedious and more boring, to be honest, than Aidan, because it's like, well, what's his we didn't know really anything. What's his real motivation? Who is he? What's it all about? What's the point to all of this? We got more character development from Wrench, a guy that wore a mask, than we did with Marcus. And so I think, actually, if there was a category that we did a review on, I think Watch Dogs 1 actually ends up winning in main character stakes than Watch Dogs 2.
Yeah, which I think is really disappointing, because you'd think that that's one of the few things they'd have learned from Watch Dogs 1, to really like focus on the protagonist, and yet we got this really boring kind of I guess because they were going for the more jokey sort of more comedy focused characters, that they sort of they forgot to take certain parts seriously. So you'd have Marcus, like, literally, it's like you could commit massacres with him. You could go to one of the CTOS or whatever they're called, the stations.
Yep.
And you could, you have the option to do it stealthy, but you could go in guns blazing and just slaughter everyone. And Marcus would have like a little funny quip about it, and it just doesn't feel right. Like something feels wrong, and I don't know how they managed to go backwards on that one.
They went from arguably a bit too serious to arguably a bit too comedic, and it didn't always hit the right notes. I thought there were certain things I think that were really great about being set in the setting that you're in that you're kind of taking on the Silicon Valley elite, which I think is awesome. I think
setting was
that needs to happen
fantastic.
more.
Yeah, the setting was arguably the best part of this game, in my opinion. It's fantastic.
Agreed. I have to say one thing though is that again I think Watch Dogs 2 was successful in also making me want to go back to Watch Dogs 1 again and see it for what it was again. And actually, I think Watch Dogs 1 grew on me more from having played Watch Dogs 2. I think we'll get into the ratings overall, and we'll do them side by side, and then give an overall. And then I think we're going to come with a conclusion both on which one is better than the other, and also like how do they stack up in other games in the genre and in the world, including GTA 5. We'll talk about that too. But do you want to just get straight into like the categories and tee them off against each other?
Yeah, let's sort of go straight into them because I think we've got quite a few to go through. So I think we'll start with graphics on both, and I think this one you can sort of expect with the sort of however many year gap there was between the two games. I'm actually not sure on the exact release dates, but there was a relatively respectable gap between the two. I don't think it was a 1 year thing like Ubisoft often do with their franchises like Assassin's Creed. I think this was sort of after they learned their lesson and knew to take some time.
So Watch Dogs 1, I believe, came out towards the beginning of 2014 and was then very quickly remastered and released onto PS4, same within a few months, if not straight away. And then Watch Dogs 2 came out close to the Christmas launch, like I think it was late November or December 2016. So it was about a 2.5 to 3 year gap.
Yeah, so this definitely shows in the graphics. So for Watch Dogs 1, we've given it a 7.2. Definitely nothing terrible, not bad. And this was including after the remaster. We're sort of going off of that. So 7.2 is definitely not bad. It's definitely above the average mark for graphics. I think some of the graphics were things that weren't necessarily in the world. So for example, like some of the hack screens were quite visually like still enjoyable. Like normally you sort of get bored when you're doing little puzzles like that, but I think Watch Dogs 1 did a good job. But Watch Dogs 2 definitely, with that gap, they had Ubisoft had a lot more time to sort of polish the graphics, and obviously it was for the stronger console, so they had a lot more time to sort of perfect it on there as well. So for Watch Dogs 2, we've given it an 8.3 versus the Watch Dogs 1 7.2. So quite a big sort of 1.1 gap there between the two. Watch Dogs 2 graphics definitely just brighter, more enjoyable, especially in the overworld. Even just some of the vehicles, some of the lighting, the water, the sort of buildings, everything just looks a lot better. And I think you probably agree with that as well, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the autumn setting for Chicago, and there's sort of a bit of bleakness. You can see, like, you can almost feel the chill in the air, but see like the red and orange sort of like leaves on the trees, and like if you stack up Watch Dogs 1 graphically to GTA 5, which came out obviously just a little bit before. GTA 5 has great graphics, but I think Watch Dogs 1 probably just about shaded it on graphics, just about edged them out in terms of slightly better graphics, I think. A couple of things like about some of the movements, about the driving and whatnot, but that's probably in gameplay as much as anything else. We're a little bit off, but overall I thought the graphics were pretty solid in the first one. But I think there was this whole step up for a San Francisco setting with the bright colors, the neon, and the very, 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 very bright, very visual, and even little things like the clothing looked a lot better as well. So I think yes, Watch Dogs 2 definitely much better. We've gone for 7.2 with Watch Dogs 1, and I think 8.3 for Watch Dogs 2, and I think that's a fair jump up, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it'd be a little bit unfair to give too much of an advantage to Watch Dogs 2 because obviously they had a lot more time. They were on stronger hardware, and all of that. But definitely, Watch Dogs 2 takes that one. So I'll let you talk about gameplay because you were sort of talking about something already. So
Yeah, so gameplay wise, so Watch Dogs get 7 out of 10, and Watch Dogs 2 get 7.2. So very close actually. 7 is a good score. 7 is not a bad score. The gameplay is very fun in both. Being able to, kind of go between like car chases and firefights. And also, like some bit of like parkour and climbing in order to get around and stuff is pretty fun. Where both fall back a little bit, I think, are in things like police pursuits. Some of them are a bit over the top, and for two games that aren't really parody like GTA is, it felt like they were just ridiculous compared to GTA, for example. Like it would be easier, I think, to lose them, and sometimes it is, but that's partly to do with difficulty, I think. And a couple of other sort of small aspects of like, there's a lot of like stealth or like sneaking in aspects in both, and a lot of the time it's actually a bit like we were talking about with the Spider-Man review when you have to be Mary Jane and whatnot. Like there's just times where it's like you can't not get seen. It's actually really stupid at times. Like for example in Watch Dogs 2, you get a drone or like a little Land Rover, like a little remote control thing, or a flying drone. And again, the way they get noticed sometimes and not noticed in other times is just really inconsistent and really weird. And yeah, so I think it's just very solid gameplay, very fun, but I don't think I can score it higher than that.
No, and I think another point which you already mentioned is the driving in both games. I think Watch Dogs 2 improves it substantially, and that's probably where a lot of our score gap comes from, but Watch Dogs 1 driving is actually, I'd go as far as to say it's bad. I think it's some of the worst driving in a game that I've ever played at times. And it really ruins it because in games like GTA, the driving is very smooth, and you sort of come to expect that in an open world game where there's vehicles of different, varying sizes and types. So I don't know, I'm not sure why they didn't put a bit more effort into the driving in Watch Dogs 1, but they definitely fixed it in Watch Dogs 2, so at least they know.
I think I could probably answer that to a certain extent, where GTA obviously has had years and years of making games. So Rockstar have made those games for 20 odd years, and the clues in the title is called Grand Theft Auto.
True.
Like it's not, whereas Watch Dogs is probably it was probably like an addition. Yeah, almost, or maybe just not as much of a priority for them because that's not where the focus was going to be. And then it just turns out that obviously to get to places quicker, like you ended up doing it. But then they obviously realized that by Watch Dogs 2, and the improvement is absolutely just ridiculous. Like by the time Watch Dogs 2 came out, like the driving is far improved. There's still some issues I have regarding the like police chases, for example, and some of the stealth parts, but overall, like it's pretty much more solid. A 2 increase is only because it would have been more, but for the fact that I was trying to factor in, that again it was from 2014 up to like 2016. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was trying to like account for the age and the time that they came out as well. And I think that Watch Dogs 2 is definitely an improvement, but it's not huge, just enough of an improvement, I think. Also, where I would drop it back on Watch Dogs 2 is the melee weapon of Aiden is like a baton, like a stick, which is a really good melee weapon, and it makes sense. Whereas the melee weapon of Marcus is like a ball on the end of a string. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It's like a rock tied to some kind of elastic like bungee rope, and it's a little bit weird. So I think I got much more satisfaction from using the baton of Aiden than Marcus's melee weapon.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So sort of moving on to our story segment here, I think we've sort of discussed a little bit in our sort of preamble, but let's get into the story for both, a little bit more nitty gritty.
Yeah, so let me take the lead just for now and see what you think afterwards. But I think this is one of the areas that is a clear advantage for the first Watch Dogs, actually, in retrospect, than it is for the second Watch Dogs. And the reason being is actually because even though it might be fairly run of the mill, fairly bland, there's some character development throughout. You get motivation for why the characters do things throughout. So Watch Dogs 1 I've gone for 6.5. So which means again it's not a bad score. It's above average. It's a decent storyline, a little bit predictable, a little bit run of the mill, nothing like too outrageous, but tells a reasonable story. And by the end of it, whereas Aiden might be a fairly boring character, but by the end of it, you've kind of seen him go through at least a bit of an arc, and still be the same, fairly the same boring character as a pullback. But basically, yeah, you see a bit of development there. Whereas in Watch Dogs 2, I've gone for the story being a 4, because it to me it felt like a story that really, really was made to justify having the hacking and having the technology and taking on like Silicon Valley, rather than a story where your character goes on a big, like life-changing experience. And you don't get any main character development. You don't get a huge amount of development amongst the side characters, apart from a couple. And you just wonder where's the motivation and how convenient a lot of this kind of stuff is. It's just like, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't the story. I don't to this day. The story, I could not tell you specifically a lot of it. I played it through twice, and I can just tell you that I can tell you missions, and I can tell you areas that you go to and things that you can do. But the story on the second one is weak. So I've given it 4, which is below average for me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, and I actually think even from the very beginning of the game, there is a sort of story-related point that kind of immediately puts Watch Dogs 2 below. And we talked about how he's on a team rather than Marcus is on a team rather than Aiden, who was sort of a lone wolf. But what Watch Dogs 1 had was this mysterious group called DedSec, which Aiden occasionally worked with, occasionally worked against, but for the most part they were separate entities, and you just know that they exist. But in Watch Dogs 2, Marcus, this character who's a lot more sort of jokey and way less suited to this mysterious sort of hacker organization, is actually a part of it, and so is your whole team. So it's a little bit of a immediate sort of letdown in Watch Dogs 2, because you expect this team to remain as this sort of mysterious team that you're not a part of, that you sometimes work with or against, but you don't. It's immediately sort of turned into this joke organization that you're a part of.
Yeah, so there's obviously massive story elements to peeling back the facade a lot of the time, and it's true in horror movies where which are the best monsters are the ones that you see or don't see, and you have this mysterious organization, you don't really know who they are. They seem pretty cool, pretty hardcore, a bit like Anonymous in the real world, like that, with having their like V for Vendetta masks almost, and just doing things and having access to things that are just ridiculous and crazy. And so from that perspective, in the first game, DedSec was this really cool shadow cell organization type thing, but in Watch Dogs 2, I don't know if it's just this is the San Francisco arm, but it's pretty loserish, to be honest. Like each of the individual characters are a bit sad, a bit lacking. Nothing special about them. A bit boring, to be honest. And the headquarters is below like a Games Workshop, like a World of Warcraft, type. And people, you can like that. I'm just saying it just makes it a little bit like, I don't know, a bit sad, almost the way they did it. Didn't like it. It was quite weak. So I think in Watch Dogs 2, the issue here is that the main character is actually just as boring, if not more boring, than Aiden, and has less motivation. But add to that the fact that the side characters aren't even that good either, and the main bad guys in the first one are quite stereotypical, but are even more so almost in this one. Like you get angry lesbian hacker chick, you get the classic like top knot like yoga instructor, like head of like a what do you call it, like a head of like a Silicon Valley like tech company, tech startup or whatever, and he looks exactly like, if you've seen Black Mirror, the episode in the recent season, he looks exactly like the CEO that's on like a silent retreat in that's played actually by the guy that played Eddie Brock, I think, in Spider-Man 3. Topher Grace, I think his name is. But it looks exactly the same with that top knot style and that kind of like yogic kind of. And again, as another thing that comes up, is at this point it's a trope. Like if you played Detroit Become Human, the guy that like had started the company that created like these androids as well. has exactly the same kind of characteristics, like the top knot and all the rest of it. It's like this evil kind of white yoga liberal, tech startup guy, and it was just really boring. Like, it's not very interesting to me. But there you go. So I think a 4, as in it's not like completely crap, but it's very forgettable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially Watch Dogs 2. I think 1, again, as you said, at least it had a sort of arc for Aiden and some of his supporting characters, but Watch Dogs 2 really did worse in the story aspect, for sure.
Yeah, well, 1, it had some tropes. It was a bit about vengeance, death of a family member, and something like there was extortion and corruption and like lies and backstabbing and all the rest of it. And then there was like the head of a mob or whatever. Like, so there was a few of those tropes. But at least it kind of works. Like, it was a tried and tested path that works. Whereas in Watch Dogs 2, it was not quite so tried and tested with the bad tropes, and it didn't work, in my opinion. Some people might disagree, but no, sorry, like 4 for me for that one. All right, world/atmosphere on both. I think these are also fairly close, to be honest. The first Watch Dogs, I've given it a 6, as in it's above average. The world they've created is pretty good. It's not too bad. Some of the NPCs are a little bit boring in terms of like walking down the sidewalks and some that you could try and hack the money off. Like, it becomes a little bit repetitive that way. But it's a good looking Chicago, to be honest, even for the time. So a 6, I think, is fair. And you do feel like there's impacts on what you're doing in the world. So, the more notorious you get as a vigilante, the more the cops are onto you a bit quicker, or people, start to be aware of it. A bit like in Assassin's Creed, with the, like the notoriety as well. And then in Watch Dogs 2, kind of similar. I think it's slightly better. I think I've given that one a 6.5, so a half a point higher. I think that's probably fair. It's a much more immersive world in that San Francisco, and going to like almost like the Google headquarters as well. There's a lot to do. There's more. Yeah, there's more shops to go into. And all the rest of it. So I think a 6.5 is probably fair for world or atmosphere here, and I think a 6 is fair for the first one. Would you agree?
I definitely agree. I think Watch Dogs 2, again, we sort of talked about it, but I think they definitely had a bit more time to sort of refine this world that you get to be in. And I think San Francisco is a fantastic setting, and I just think it was sort of... Watch Dogs 1 definitely did nothing wrong, really, with their setting. I think they did it better than sort of the average what you'd expect. But Watch Dogs 2 did a little bit better than even that. So yeah, definitely I think the 6.5 and the 6 are the fair scores on that one.
Agreed. So moving swiftly on to soundtrack. Watch Dogs, the first one, I've given a 5. For the reason is that it's, on the most part, it's pretty forgettable. Actually, I have to say, one thing I liked what they did is that they chose only Chicago artists that are either from or associated strongly with Chicago to be on the radio stations, which is a little small kind of tidbit, but I think it's quite a nice little feature. And it almost made me score it higher, but for the fact that I don't really remember almost any of the soundtrack, and I've played it through 3 times at this point. So I think... I think a 5. It's not bad. It's not good. It's just middling. Soundtrack for Watch Dogs 2, I've gone for a 7, and that's because I think that it's a bit more memorable. It's a bit more fitting, and I love the radio's soundtracks a little bit more. So I don't think they went for San Francisco only artists this time. I could be wrong on that one, but it feels like they went for a bit more expensive. What do you think?
Yeah, so again, I think that's a pretty good idea that they had with Watch Dogs 1, but again, I don't remember any tracks from Watch Dogs 1. I don't remember anything at all. Like, I think the radio stations in the cars are one thing, but also just the music that they have, firefights or police chases, I don't remember it at all, and I've played it through twice at least. So yeah, I think it was what you'd expect. Like, I don't remember hearing any tracks and thinking that it was out of place. But at the same time, there were none that I was like, wow, this really like gets me in the mood for this sort of setting and this scene. Whereas Watch Dogs 2, I think it had a lot more sort of like synth. It had a bit of, it had some pretty good like combat music, or some of the stealth like ambient musics were a little bit more memorable. And
Agreed.
I don't really know if they only went for San Francisco artists on the radio stations. I don't think they did. I think they had a bit of a wider selection. So
Yeah,
I think
think
that
so.
definitely
I
wins
think
out.
so. Yeah, I think a 7 because it was pretty good. It wasn't amazing. There are definitely games with far better soundtracks out there, but I think a 7 is probably a reasonable thing here because it was pretty good.
Yeah.
And it fit the general vibe. I think is what I'm getting at. So overall immersion, again, not that much difference in scores. I originally went for a 6 for the first Watch Dogs and a 6.5 for Watch Dogs 2. To be honest, the more I think about it, the more I can't actually separate them for immersion. To be honest, I actually think that I'd go for the same score for both. And I'm just debating whether it's bumping up the first one to a 6.5 or bringing down the second one to a 6. I think if anything, it would be probably bringing down the second one to a 6. The reason why is because you're immersed at parts, and there's other parts that just completely take you out. Something that I keep coming back to is the police pursuits when they're in pursuit of you. Like, you're this amazing hacker, it should be much easier to sort of escape them, and it's not. And there's some missions the way you really get into it, like in the first one, for example, when you have to like allow yourself to go into prison because you're trying to get to someone who's in there, and then there's other missions where it's just like, yeah, this is just I just need to get through this part to get to the next part. So I think a 6 is probably where I'm going to go with both. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think bringing down the second one is the fair play. I don't think we can really justify 6.5 on either or higher. I think that for the most part you're relatively immersed. I think there's definitely parts where you really get into it, but then there's parts where you're really just almost arcadey, just trying to get through it, just want to move on to the next sort of segment. I think that's especially so in Watch Dogs 2, which is obviously why I think I agree that we brought it down. I think at least in Watch Dogs 1 a lot of the missions have some weight, at least for Aiden as a character, whereas Watch Dogs 2 kind of lost that, so you're sort of less immersed because you're not as invested in the protagonist. But yeah, I still think it's above average. I think a 6 on both is absolutely fair.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is going to be wow factor. And again, anyone that's watched our videos on this knows that this is sort of like an intangible thing, which is really just based on, I guess, how we're made to feel. Does it, knock us off our feet? How much is our mouth open going wow or whatever. I think for the first one I actually gave that an 8, the first Watch Dogs game, and the reason being is that there were moments in that one where it was, again, because of when it came out, you're playing often alongside like a GTA 5, where sometimes you almost feel like you're playing that game and then you realize that you can press a button and then the red light changes and you can sort of lose someone that's chasing you behind you because they get crushed by oncoming traffic or whatever. And things like that do sometimes make you go, wow. So an 8, it might be a little bit generous in retrospect, but I think I'm trying to remember how I felt playing it the first time, and I think an 8 is probably where I want to go with that one. And where I'd like to give the second one similar, but I've gone for a 7 on that one, just because again that's partially related to the fact that we already had the first one, and it's partially, the wow would have been in the setting, but not so much in the characters or the story, if I'm honest. Do you disagree?
Yeah, so I think, on your first playthrough of Watch Dogs 1 especially, you're sort of, you're exploring the setting and the characters, sure, but you're also learning all these hacks as you go along. You're sort of completing your skill tree, learning new hacks that eventually help you in different scenarios. Like you can get the one where you bring up like the like security, like on the road, certain roads have like these security pylon things that come up so that cars can't drive down them, and you can put that up as you go past and then nothing will follow you, stuff like that. But in Watch Dogs 2, the reason why it sort of falls short is because a lot of these hacks you've already kind of explored as you went through Watch Dogs 1. So as soon as you get to 2, it's like you want to get to these new hacks, but you kind of got to go through all the old ones first too. So I think Watch Dogs 1 was where all the innovation happened. Watch Dogs 2 was a lot of it was the same, or in some cases with the characters worse. But again, with the setting, it sort of carries it back up to a closer score. So yeah, I agree with both.
Yeah. And I think something to be said, and it probably was more back to gameplay, really than anything else. But I just want to mention it here. Is that the hacking on Watchdogs is all on within your screen, whereas what happens on Watchdogs 2 is that the sort of hacking mini game, if you like, comes up on like the side of a building or on the floor, and so it's physically there. You've got like run around. So when you've got these time frames on, and you have to like physically run around, it just to me it just makes it more complex than it needed to be, to be honest. And so that I don't know if that's a wow factor or a gameplay moment, but I guess when I was played through Watch Dogs 2 the first time when that came up, even my first thought was like, oh, okay, this is not a good innovation, and I think that does detract from the wow moments, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that ties into a lot of different points, so I think it's fine to put it in wow factor, but yeah, it sort of takes you out of it. You don't feel like a cool, like kind of badass hacker when you're sort of running around like a headless chicken, like to get to the right spot to twist a little thing on the building with your phone. It doesn't feel that good.
Or when you're using the drone and it's up the side of like a tower, and you have like a 30-meter radius before you lose connection with your drone, and the tower's 40 meters high, and the top part you're trying to get to is right at the top, and you lose connection, so you've got to then send it out again and fly all the way up there again. It's just really annoying. So it is a bit of gameplay, but it's also, as I said, it really detracts away from that well, I think.
Yeah, so I think we agree that Watch Dogs 1 had a bit more here, and Watch Dogs 2 was a little bit weaker on that one. And I think that brings us cleanly into sort of our final segment here, which is whether it met, exceeded, or was below our expectations.
Absolutely.
And I think
mhm.
I think this
So I'd
one's
say
probably
the
our
first
most
one met.
interesting. Yep.
I think it just about met when you consider all things. It probably was a solid 5, so down the middle, met expectations, didn't quite better, it didn't quite come underneath. And I think, again, a lot of this, it can't be understated, the effect of what GTA 5 had at the time. I think the two did sort of almost tie into each other in a lot of ways, or this one did as well, because, it was released in the same period of time. It was this sandbox style and everything else. And I think that that probably built expectations further than what it should have been, based on GTA almost, because people are saying GTA, but with hacking, and it never was. So when you factor in that it never actually was, rather than what the hype was at the time, I think you come back to it probably did meet expectations exactly where it should be. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I think Watch Dogs 1 is the most interesting point on this one because, with the whole marketing campaign, with GTA coming out so close to its release window, expectations were kind of through the roof for a lot of people. But I think in our case, I think it was a little bit unfair to expect, a GTA with hacking from Ubisoft here. I think again we need to bring the comparison back to it's closer to a modern day Assassin's Creed than it is to a GTA. And I think it definitely, with expectations sort of in where they should be in check. I think 5 it met exactly what you should expect from a Ubisoft sort of modern day Assassin's Creed. You shouldn't be expecting a Rockstar Games like full on experience from Watch Dogs, and I think it met expectations pretty much dead on. Whereas Watch Dogs 2, I think if we go to it, we've given this one a 4. So again, this is just under expectations. It didn't meet them.
I think so.
It's a little bit worse.
Look, when it was announced, and it was announced to be in like Silicon Valley, San Francisco setting, and it was going to have more characters and all the rest of it, I think my first thoughts were actually my expectations were raised, because it was like, right, well, what if you could take the first one, add it into a really cool setting? Not that the first one wasn't, but another really cool setting, and you can have better characters, because that's what I think one of the things the first one did miss. Better characters, and it will obviously have more features, better graphics, and just generally improvements. It raised my expectations. So this one was also a bit of a victim of having raised expectations, and I think it didn't really beat them. Like it was a solid game. It was fun for the first 2 weeks, and then I got bored of it. Like I didn't finish it in the first 2 weeks. that I was playing it in terms of life and everything else. It wasn't like 2 weeks of sat there playing it. What I mean is that I didn't finish it as quickly as some other games, and I actually didn't end up coming back to it for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, because it was like no, I don't know, something just I don't know. And then eventually I came back to it, having played through the first one with you again, I think, and then coming back to the second one, playing through with this time with you, helping me get further and almost like egging each other on rather than, because we were experiencing it together.
You have a bit more motivation, yeah.
Right, yeah, and the bits that maybe you're personally getting bored at, maybe you pass over the controller.
Yeah.
And it just helped, and so I got through it, and it kind of was like, okay, yeah, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great, and I think overall, I was expecting more. To be honest, I was.
Yeah, well,
I thought there would be
again,
also after the first one. Sorry, just to finish off
okay,
real quick.
yeah.
After the first one, with a couple of very, very slim but definitely there references to the fact that it was set in the same world as Abstergo and Assassin's Creed games. I think the second one, I expected more of that, and we didn't get any more really, or not much more. And I think that was perhaps a bit of a disappointment for me. And we'll talk about that in another video coming this week, I think. But that was something that I was expecting, and we didn't get that.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. With Watch Dogs 1 again, like the expectations were really high for most people, but kind of like it met them just fine. But I think Watch Dogs 2, you sort of expected, because Watch Dogs 1 had a few shortcomings, you sort of expected that they would be rectified in Watch Dogs 2, and you would get what you were promised originally. And definitely, I was guilty of this for Watch Dogs 2. I definitely thought there would be more. And there just wasn't. I think even the promise of things like co-op, which was, I guess, sort of there, but it was sort of just people would be in your world, and they literally all they'd ever do is just sort of
Your freedoms can only be protected if democracy thrives.
It just wasn't overall.
Yeah,
like,
just was
just
annoying.
rigging the elections.
yeah, it was
Your
just a lot.
elections.
It was just a lot.
Your favorite social media
decisions that
giant
maybe could've just
invite
been reverted back
knows
to Watch
everything
Dogs
about
1,
you,
and it would have been
and they're
a better game
manipulating your
overall,
feed
but
to tailor
yeah,
your
I
opinion
definitely
to
think
their
it didn't meet
interests.
expectations. And
They are
it was a
fooling
little
you
bit
into
short of
voting
what I
for
was
their puppet, Congressman
I
Mark
think also
Russ.
one of the things that I was
Invite
potentially hoping
wields
for, and
the
it's never
single
announced
most
or anything, it
powerful
was more just
population
on me,
control tool
but
ever
this is also,
created.
this influences
Defend
why I was giving
democracy.
it.
Help
It's like
us
GTA
tear down
5,
Invite.
again, sorry to keep
Lend us your
mentioning that
processing
during this,
power
but
by
it's so
downloading our
relevant.
app together.
They had 3
We
separate
will
characters,
expose Congressman
each with
Russ.
like pretty much an equal
Join
amount of
us.
gameplay and stories
We are
and missions
dead
and whatnot, right? This one, I genuinely thought you'd get
Hello
at least
everyone,
2 characters.
I'm
to control.
Dominic Gay, the senior producer
Because,
on Watch
we
Dogs
were
2.
told that, okay,
And
we're gonna
today I
have,
will guide you through
dead
this vertical
tech. So it's
slice of
like,
the
right,
game.
we've got loads of hackers.
Watch Dogs 2 is set in the San
And
Francisco
I genuinely
Bay,
thought
a
that you
beautiful
might get
area,
more than just one
a cultural
person.
beacon, and the
You knew that
birthplace
there was a
of the
bit
tech
of a sort of
revolution.
let's do a diversity
From
thing,
Oakland to Marin
and
County,
so that's why they
from the
went with
Golden
black
Gate
guys
to
as main
Silicon
characters to a certain
Valley,
extent,
your adventure
I
will
feel.
take you all
And I
across the
wasn't
Bay
against
Area.
that at all. I was okay with that,
You
but
are
they didn't
part
really make a
of
great
DedSec,
character.
a
He
hacker
wasn't that
group
interesting. He
rebelling
didn't have much
against an
motivation,
establishment
and he wasn't,
that
you know,
uses
like,
technology
just,
to
I don't
take
know,
away
I
people's
wasn't,
freedom.
we didn't get enough
You play
of
as
him.
Marcus Holloway,
But then they didn't even
a
like
brilliant hacker
balance that
fighting
out
to
by having,
take
say,
back
another
control
character
from
to
this
control.
corrupted
Remember
establishment.
whether it was like that Sitara, and then there was like a couple of
This
missions
demo
later
is
on,
not
like right at the
scripted,
end game,
and you are
where
free to do as you
briefly
please
were
in
a
our
couple of the
open
other characters
world.
of DedSec for like 5 minutes each, and that was it. But like, I'm talking about
Using
like, to have
Marcus's
almost an equal
skills,
amount as
you can
Marcus,
hack
and you just
into
didn't get that.
anyone within
And
the
so
city,
for me, that was
into
part of
most
what led to
electronic
this
devices
disappointment.
or any car's computer system.
Yeah,
Any
again,
of
I just
these
think
can be
that
manipulated in multiple ways
a
as
lot
you
of what was
progress in the
promised in
game
Watch Dogs
and
1
extend
that
Marcus's
wasn't quite
abilities.
delivered perfectly. You sort
In
of
this
expect
case,
it to be
Marcus
refined in
hacks
Watch
into
Dogs
this
2,
car
again,
and
it still
controls
wasn't
its steering
magic. I just
remotely.
think that, yeah, Watch Dogs 2 didn't really
You can also hack
do anything
entire
new. It
areas
didn't
of the
really
city
establish
to
anything
powerful
new.
effect.
It was kind of just Watch Dogs 1 again.
Here,
just
we
remade.
distract all
And
these
that's why
people
it's
by
sort of-
sending
it's actually
messages
just
to their
worse on the
phones.
expectations front.
As you explore the Bay
Agreed.
Area, you can cross
I think
paths
in
with other
conclusion, like,
players,
both
never
games are actually
leaving
a
the
lot more
comfort
playable,
of your
a lot more
single-player
enjoyable,
experience.
and actually a lot better than
As you
what a lot of
seamlessly encounter
the,
other
the
friendly DedSec
general
members, you can
consensus
communicate
is
with them,
since coming
and with
out.
the single press of a
But
button, join them
there
as
are
a
definitely
co-op
games
team.
that are play,
But for
I'd
now,
say go
let's
and play,
continue in solo.
But if they were still full
Our
price,
numbers are
or if
going
you
through
would
the
have
roof,
to debate
but
between
we
that
just promised
and
a little
say
bit of
another
an
game,
invite
I would actually just go with the other game, depending on what that is, obviously too. But that's probably what I'd go say. If you had a bit of extra and you don't mind going for this one, go for it.
you
But
at,
if you're
man?
like, do I go between this one and say, I don't know, Witcher 3, for example? Well, probably better off going Witcher 3.
Okay, people, this is strictly
Which
by the
one's
book.
better
Don't paint
overall?
outside the lines. and
Overall,
stay
those
frosty.
scores add up together
Fuck
and then
you.
average out
Just
both
get
to
in
be
there and find some rusty
6.3
nails and crucify Thrust to
overall.
social media
So
press.
both
On my
basically
way.
coming out about the same.
The game
I think
has
that's pretty
multiple
fair for both.
operations the player can discover
I'd
and
give the
decide to
edge to
pursue.
the first one.
In the interest
terms
of time,
the
let's
story
join
and
Marcus
the
as he meets up with another
main,
DedSec hacker,
story mode.
Wrench.
And I'd probably
They
give
are
the edge to
about
the
to
second one in
infiltrate
terms of
politicians'
overall world
penthouse
free
in
play
order to
ability,
acquire
if
evidence
I'm honest.
of his
Would
plan
you
to
disagree
rig the
with that?
elections with the
No, I
help
think
of
that's
a
a pretty
social
fair way to
media
summarize
giant.
it, and I think it again it sort of comes down to preference at this point. If you want the more updated, slightly more polished game, you might as well pick up Watch Dogs 2. However, if you are playing it for sort of the story,
check it out.
it feels a bit weird to recommend Watch Dogs 1 for story.
You can
'cause
see the
again,
whole
like,
city
that was
from
one
here.
of the biggest issues with it was that
Whole lot of
it
people out
wasn't
there,
that
man.
great, but it's still better than
Whole lot
Watch
of
Dogs
people.
2 in that front. So definitely, if you're
Yeah,
playing it for
getting
story, pick up
screwed.
Watch Dogs 1. And I
don't
think
even feel it.
the good
Just-
news is Watch Dogs 1 was given out for free actually on
fucked up.
Uplay on PC, and I think there's lots and lots of deals
it's
on
gonna
Watch
be a
Dogs
hell
1
of
and
a
Watch Dogs
fight
2 at
turning
this
them back
point
into
on
people.
like PS stores
Fucking A,
and
man.
Uplay and that, because the games
Okay,
are sort of
you find the evidence.
older
and I'll
now, and
monitor
the new
exit
one's
strategy.
coming out in a couple of months, or a month. So
I think the combined package for both of them on like PS Store is around $25 for both.
yeah, so I would definitely recommend picking them up on a
Hey,
on
is
at
that
a
the
price
congressman?
like that.
No,
but
I do
I
believe
can't
that
say
is
I
a
would recommend
helicopter.
buying either of them
Fuck
at full
you.
price in
Marcus,
this day
the
and
building
age.
just went off the grid. We can't
Don't
get
know
any
if you'd
horses
get full.
inside.
If
They're up
anyone
to
would get full
something.
price for it anymore.
I'll see what.
I guess in conclusion, if you haven't played them already, I definitely would like.
The
By
player
all
is
means,
free
you
to
can. It's
approach
still
the
very
mission in
enjoyable.
any way he
Still very
wishes,
fun, and
as a
also a
ghost,
little bit novel,
as an aggressor,
as well,
or
on
as a
their take on
trickster
things.
who focuses on
And I think
manipulation
in their
and
own ways,
hacking.
they're both very beautiful.
Here
to look
we're
at,
using our new
but
quadcopter to
I
scout
think
the
that overall,
premises.
don't expect
The drone can also
them
be
to
upgraded
on
with
the
new
level of some of the other
functionalities.
games that we've reviewed on here, and some of the other games that you would
They
think.
got
So
armed help
take
in
away
here.
the
Something's
GTA, to be
definitely
honest,
up.
because they're not. Think of them more in the Assassin's Creed world, and you'll probably have a better time.
Here
And
we
with
use
that,
network
thank you
hacking to
very much for
quickly
watching.
access a
We're
security
going to have some
camera
more
within
videos
the
on the Watch
apartment.
Dogs franchise as a whole, including Assassin's Creed and that sort of relevance. So
They're
be sure to
scrubbing
look
the
out for
evidence.
that in the future,
Get us
and
access,
we hope to
Marcus,
see you there.
before it all gets wiped.
I'll get you inside
See
the
you in the
system.
next video.
Once I do, you use the botnet to brute force your way